Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Inept General, and welcome to some Total War Warhammer news. Now, it's been a little while since we've done a news update, and there was a little bit of news on Saturday that I thought marks an opportunity to fill you in on some news. The headliner, obviously, being that Kroq-Gar has been confirmed as the second legendary lord for the Lizard Men, and there's been other bits and pieces of news that have we've been drip-fed over the last couple of weeks that I thought I'd catch everybody up on. Now, the first bit of news is, of course, about Kroq-Gar. Now, a lot of you might turn around and say to me, Inept General, what are you talking about? Kroq-Gar was confirmed along with the trailer. And although since that trailer came out, I did speculate at the time that it may have been Kroq-Gar we saw in the trailer itself, by sort of second consideration, I thought that was actually probably just a veteran Saurus who's going to act as a general type rather than Kroq-Gar himself. But I also hypothesized that Kroq-Gar is more than likely the second legendary lord in the Lizard Men army because they included the Carnosaur in the game, as we saw in the trailer. And indeed, on Saturday, I believe it was, Creative Assembly released this concept art for the Carnosaur and the Saurus Rider. As you can see, he's been sort of rubbed out there. But I think that's maybe the generic one, if not Kroq-Gar himself. But the turning point was, with that, obviously, came this comment here. Grimlock was one of the largest, most ferocious of his brood of Carnosaurs. And as you know, Grimlock is, of course, Kroq-Gar's chosen mount and named mount. So Kroq-Gar is definitely the second general. It's not necessarily the world's most earth-shattering news, but we have it for sure now. I still don't think that was him in the trailer necessarily. I think that was just a generic general in the trailer, but hopefully we'll see a slightly more unique model for Kroq-Gar when he does appear. I may in fact put together a lore video just on Kroq-Gar out of my likely legendary lords for the Lizard Men video. If you don't want to wait for that, just check the top right-hand corner or the description and go to my likely legendary lords for the Lizard Men to see Kroq-Gar's lore video I've made a little while back. But aside from Kroq-Gar and his Carnosaur, we also got the confirmation of one of the High Elf types of general. Now, the only one they gave us in this concept art is the idea of the High Elf Princess, which, although wasn't a unit in the High Elf army, it's a good take on it, and maybe a good way of them creating two types of generals, of particularly martial-focused generals for the High Elves. Perhaps the princesses focused on bows and missile attacks, whereas the princes themselves, rather than the princesses, will be perhaps more melee-focused. Not to draw any gender stereotypes there, but I'm just taking that from the fact that we have the princesses drawn with rather elegant bows in the corner over there. So I was just maybe jumping to conclusions. But we have a confirmation of a type of general that the High Elves would have, and looks fantastic. I love the art on this one. It looks really great. Do check out the Total War Warhammer Facebook page for a few more concept images and all the stuff they've released so far. But I'm just going to go through a couple of other units that I haven't covered since my Everything We Know About Total War Warhammer 2 So Far video, which was a while back now. But if you haven't seen that yet, again, top right-hand corner now, or down in the description if you want to have a look at some of the earlier units we've had confirmed. So apart from the High Elf Princess, we also have the Silver Helms, which are a unit of High Elf Cavalry. Again, they feature in my High Elf Army video. I think they look pretty fantastic here, nicely designed. If the rendering in the actual game looks anything like this, I think they'll look very impressive. There are some cool alterations and sort of differences between the units, but on the whole, I think they look fantastic for the Silver Helms. And we have the Cold Ones in this concept art as well. Fantastic stuff. Looking forward to seeing the Cold One Riders in the Dark Elf army. I think they'll be absolutely amazing and just cause massive amounts of destruction on the battlefield. Riding huge raptors, effectively. Can't wait. Really excited about seeing them in the game. And we have Temple Guard. Now, maybe we saw some Temple Guard in that long shot of the trailer, but we didn't get to see them up close in the art, in the way the concept art drew them out. And so I just thought I'd include them as well, because I think they look pretty cool. I particularly like some of the footwear they're given in this. It's a great little idea. I don't think that, I'm not sure if that was ever featured in the models. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it looks great. The little extra golden claw they adorned themselves with. Looking forward to seeing the Temple Guard in Total War Warhammer 2. And this one for the Bastillodon. Now, I've spoken about this a little bit in my future DLC, where I commented that we have had concept art for this. And the thing on this Bastillodon's back is an item known as the solar engine, which stores up solar energy and fires it out like a laser beam from the top of the Bastillodon. And the other type is something known as the Ark of Sotek, which is essentially a magic machine or just box of snakes that spits out an unending number of snakes from within its mechanics. Now, that hasn't been featured, and I have stipulated that I have a theory out there that we might not see that until the DLC that features a character known as the Prophet of Sotek. But to get my full thoughts on that, do check out my future DLC video. But there is something on this image which I downloaded from their Facebook page I did want to point out. All the other full concept art pages often have a full black frame around them, but you'll notice this one at the top has been cut off. Now, that might just be a simple coincidence of them adding this picture onto Facebook, but I think rather there is an Ark of Sotek on this piece of concept art that was drawn up, but they decided not to include that with this image. Now, whether that was for space or whether that's because they intentionally don't want to include the Ark of Sotek piece of equipment on the back of this Bastillodon at launch, who knows? That's just speculation, but it's just something to know out there. It's not the full border, so it might not be the full page of the concept art. But still looks great. Can't wait to see the Bastillodons. Fantastic unit. And it's the only one they've really spoken about rather than the Bastillodon with the Ark of Sotek on its back. So we'll have to wait and see for that one. And the other thing I wanted to bring up, the other piece of news we've had is an article from PC Gamer was released this week. And a lot of that, or earlier this week, maybe last week. And an article concerning Total War Warhammer 2 contained a lot of the information we know already, a lot of information I've covered in previous videos. There were just a couple of other things I wanted to mention to you guys that I thought were interesting in that article. The first one is Creative Assembly's motivation behind creating the Vortex system for the campaign, rather than the campaigns as they were carried out in Total War Warhammer 1. Now, the motivation they give is that they found through their data collection that not everyone always finished the campaigns in Total War Warhammer 2, in Total War Warhammer 1, sorry. And they kind of just stopped halfway through once they kind of dominated large sections of the map and never actually finished the campaign. Now, to combat that, they came up with this idea of the Vortex, which is always a race to meet certain objectives. Now, all the different factions have very different objectives in order to sort of move up what I have to imagine will be a progress bar in order to gain control of the Vortex. So this makes it a very interesting element, and maybe the idea is to push players along to meet the final objective, to actually finish off the campaign. So that seems to be their main motivation behind it. They also wanted to point out that you will at all times during a Total War Warhammer 2 campaign be aware of where the AI is, or an opposing player, or your co-op player, however you're playing it, how far along in their progress towards the Vortex they are as well. So you won't be suddenly blindsided by a game over and one of the AI factions has beaten you to the Vortex, but you had no idea how close they were. So you'll always be aware of their progress, which I think is a good little element to have in place. The other thing we got was a couple of details on the different campaigns. Now, there wasn't a lot said about the Dark Elf ones, except that they have acknowledged that the Dark Elves have a long history of sort of pirating and raiding over the seas and going to foreign lands and taking their riches. And they are going to hold true to that. So it'll be interesting to see, and I'm still very curious about the naval mechanics they are going to introduce, although we know there's not going to be naval combat as such. So I've stipulated before in my video with Lionheart in the past that I see it being more of a raiding stance on water, but I think that has its own trouble, so I'm very curious to see how they get around that aspect of the game. As far as the High Elves go, they emphasize trade routes, but they also emphasize the fact that trade routes were a pretense for the High Elves, really just to kind of keep an eye on what's going on with the world and set up a spy network. And they emphasize the fact that the High Elf campaign is going to be a lot about the awareness of what other races are doing. Now, because the High Elves are in themselves quite isolationist, they like to stay on their little island of Ulthuan, it'll be interesting to see how that mechanic actually works out, whether you meet your objectives on the Vortex by simply making alliances and uncovering more of the map actively, or something along those lines. I'm really curious to see, because that seems to be something very different than anything we've had in Total War Warhammer so far. So a kind of spy network focus and an awareness of what's going on in the world around you, rather than necessarily a conquest focus objective, is apparently what we have in store for the High Elves. And the last one is the Lizardmen. And the Lizardmen one revolves around the idea of the geomantic web. Now, those of you who have seen my Legendary Lords video for the Lizardmen will be aware that the geomantic web is essentially the idea of ley lines. I mean, we've had that idea in our world for a while, that there's energy of the earth running through certain lines around the globe. And if you build stuff on those lines, they will help you tap into those energies. And that's a lot of how the old ones instructed the Lizardmen to build their cities. So the Lizardmen are apparently going to have to conquer certain areas along these ley lines, but they'll be placed quite randomly. So say you were playing a High Elf campaign, you might find it bizarre the type of places the AI is going around conquering from the Lizardmen, because they just appear completely random. But as far as the Lizardmen are concerned, those are key locations on the geomantic web. So I think that's a really interesting different aspect for them, but it also means that a Lizardmen campaign might be quite tricky of you having to take armies just deep into enemy territory, unless you just start conquering vast swathes of them just to get to these isolated locations on the geomantic web. But again, something that's just really tweaked my curiosity. There weren't a huge amount of details in this article, but really tweaked my curiosity. We got a little bit more information on how the campaigns will play out in Total War Warhammer 2. And that about sums it up for this news update, guys. Not a huge amount, but as I said, we've had a little drip feed since the trailer came out, and we've had 1 or 2 bits of information. Still very excited about the game. Like me, I've stipulated before, but we probably won't get the next update until E3. At that point, I assume we're going to see Skaven, but who knows? But super looking forward to that, and I'll keep you posted as soon as we have more news. All right, guys, as always, thank you very much for tuning in for this quick, brief news update on Total War Warhammer 2. Quick thank you to my patrons, John, Reese, Colin, Thomas, Mateus, Samuel, and Matthews. Thanks, you guys, for helping me out, and I hope to catch all of you on the next one.